Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Tales and Tactics. And this is a special one. We're doing a new episode type, which is going by Do It Yourself, or DIY. And it is going to be, in effect, a mailbag episode, but focused around the ideas of games that you, the listener, have sent in. Now, these don't have to be full games. These could be modules, tools, any of these sorts of things, and we will do our best to review them fairly and give our critique as well. But our whole pledge to you is that if we make an episode out of it, and if they're small, we might have to make a grouping of different products. But if we make an episode out of it, we are effectively giving a seal of approval to your game. So we're not going to put anything on here and just slag people off for something that they made. If we do find that it's not quite up to snuff, that will just be between us and the person who sent it to us, and we will give them all the same critique, but it's just down that avenue. Without further ado, this is our first DIY. The game in question has been sent to us by Christopher Reichenbach, and it is Fights of Fantasy. And it is quite an interesting little game, actually.
Indeed. Now, there's a lot of options available for this game when you look it up on Wargame Vault. You'll see there's a whole bunch of choices. I'll say that we have engaged with the primary rules document, and that's what we got pulled into and sucked into, just because there's a lot here. First, I'll just give you a summary before I get lost into what the game is, but it's a detailed and modular fantasy war game. It's a miniatures war game. It's about custom unit creation. It uses opposed dice rolls, so it's a D20 opposed rolling game with a dynamic initiative system that's going to change and fluctuate from turn to turn. So it is made very specifically for players who want a freedom in their setting, in their army design, flexibility in the characters and characterizations that they choose to employ in their setting, and then a lot of detail, a lot of tactical grit that can be considered. So we'll get into it. To talk about this as a game, as a product, I'll let Max give you a little bit more of that angle on things to begin with, and then we'll talk more about the mechanics of the game as we get into it.
Right. So this is a well-considered game. It comes in, at least in this PDF form, at 169 pages, and it details massive amounts of information for just about anything. So it's very, Troy did a good job of explaining the intent behind the game, which I think is quite clear, that it's, in a sense, a fantasy toolbox war game.
Yes.
And I can see it being really, really good for something like if you wanted to introduce mass combat into an OSR-style role-playing game. This actually looks like a really, really good candidate for that.
Oh, that's what it said to me immediately. The first thing that I saw was a certain compatibility with that OD&D flavor in the way that it approaches talking about the characters you'll be playing with.
Mm-hmm.
So you could quite easily map that on. Like, for example, let's just take a look at some of the character types that are present in the game. So this is me getting ahead of myself. We'll first discuss that there are very small bipeds that are classified as melee fighters. You might think to yourself, is that a halfling or goblin? It's like, well, it could be both. And then you'll be able to rank them in a status that goes from inferior all the way up to legendary, and that'll have appropriate changes to their melee and their morale, their attacks and defense. And that can be thought of as you go all the way from this very small biped to, like very large. You have giants. And that just translates very cleanly onto a monster manual, dare I say. And I see the ability to conduct this pocket of gaming that's kind of popular amongst a certain audience, where we call it mass skirmish, where like it's more than man to man, because you're not just doing 10 guys fighting 10 guys, but you're also not fighting in formalized block formation, in the more grand tactical or operational scales. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you're not doing, it's not like a large scale Napoleonics or like a Kriegspiel block scale game where you're got a massive battlefield and units are represented very abstractly. No, this is something where you'd have probably, I believe, recommended between 25 and 28 millimeter, though I think it could probably be as small as 15.
Yep, totally.
It's a good way to put together something like a slightly larger skirmish game. And I'm trying to think of a game that also kind of comes close to that. I know that there are a few that have the flexibility of scaling.
It's kind of like a Knight, Pike, and Sword is an adjacent cousin of this game, I would say, because that's also a game where you'll have like 4 to 6 man little fantasy squads, so it's equivalent in a few regards like that. They choose to handle some of the same questions in very different ways. What I like is in this game, one model is one entity, as they say. So it's a one-to-one relation between what you're fielding and what they represent in your setting. So it doesn't, there's an implied setting, sure. Like, again, OSR fantasy, right? But it's not prescriptive or tells you by any means what you need to play like. But this is something that's coded into the game where that swordsman is that swordsman. It's not necessarily, an approximate 15 swordsman. It's like, no, that's that guy. And he is going to take arrows into his shield specifically. And it has a certain, like, you do roll opposed for each confrontation in a fight, as well as for each shot with an archer. So there are some very granular moments that kind of don't cap the model count, but it certainly encourage you to have an appetite that you can actually fulfill, don't get too crazy. But I will say that I really do like that it is a 1-for-1 game, 28 mil, all the way down to 15 very comfortably. You could do it in 10 if you got good eyes.
Yep, for sure. In regards to the material itself, so I'll start with my praises. It is very clear, and most of the pages are very nicely laid out with good margins at top and bottom. The header and footer look really well spaced. I like the little sword motif throughout. One criticism I have in the format just by itself, there's a few things. And it's funny, most of my critiques of this game come from the format itself, not the rules. It's more about the presentation, which is a different matter entirely as to how it plays. So I have a background in graphic design and publishing, and certainly handle a lot of layout. Something that I think would improve the design of this quite a bit would be a 2-column layout. That'll eliminate a lot of the lingering white space on the right side of the page, because right now it's single page, all the text is laid out in one space. So breaking that into 2 columns will make it look a lot tighter and a lot easier to read. There's something called essentially eye lingering, which is your eyes get tired when they have to cross the full distance of the page. So breaking it into 2 columns makes it easier to kind of read back and forth.
I can attest to that, yes.
The table of contents is nice as it's broken into 3 columns. And it's some of the margins are a little tight, but otherwise it looks really good and it's very readable.
And it is rigorous in its detail as well.
So another positive thing that I can certainly say are it uses very clear indicators for units. So it uses essentially demonstrations of blocks to show what close order and open order look like, and gives you a good visual demonstration of each of those things. There are the reference grids. Let's see, where are they? I guess they start at about page 54. These are immaculate. They look really, really good. It's very easy to track out all of the different positions about what stats are where. It would almost be useful to just print these separately if you were playing the game and then just keep them as a sort of reference.
We'll get to that, but I think that's kind of essential.
Yeah, that it makes it a lot more usable. When Troy and I were playing the game and testing it, I basically had these grids out and he was going through the rule set.
Yeah.
So we found a way to make that work in the digital form. But no, I really like the layout of these. It's very easy to denote the different separations, and each unit is displayed clearly on each page. So medium bipeds, magic, and missiles. And then it has 3 variations on that. And you have within that different levels of competency. So common, superior, elite, notable, renowned, legendary, and each of the stats level up on that. There are a lot of these, so it's good that the layout was done very, very well with this, and I definitely appreciate that. On to my main concern with the way this book is put together, and that is everything in this book is written in bullet points. And when you're writing out a rule set, I often do that. Sometimes I'll either write it into an Excel sheet, or I'll just make a bunch of bullet points, and then this is this rule, and this is how this connects together. And it's a really good way of assembling ideas. However, it is really, really hard to read and retain information when it is in that form. Bullet points are very good if you have single instances of certain things, where, say, this equals this, or this is the methodology for this thing, and maybe there's a few variations of it. But if you are explaining the concept of someone and you want them to retain that idea without having to go back and reference it, it is better to write it out in a prose cause and effect fashion. So literally writing it out in paragraphs, because then it feels as though the reader is having a conversation with the person who wrote it. And so they are able to internalize and grok that information more thoroughly. And that's why this game, to me, feels, at least in that one aspect, a little incomplete. Or it doesn't feel like a fully professional product because it doesn't have those varying forms of delivering the information. And it's not to say that you shouldn't use bullet points at all. Bullet points are an amazing and effective way to single out key points. That's literally what they're for. But it becomes very laborsome to write the entire book in this fashion and then have someone read it. So I would recommend, and we're not all amazing writers, and you don't even really have to be, but I think the best thing to do is to write the rules out in an explanatory fashion, right? Because then people will be able to buy in to the idea about what you're selling. It's really interesting that this came up, because I don't think I've ever run into a situation where I really had to think, why do we even write like that? But having going through and read it and having done other instructional documents and other work that I've done, it really is a matter of retention and maintaining the attention of your reader and trying to convey those concepts. So one of the things that I think would improve, and this, again, is entirely separate from the rules, which I found quite enjoyable, actually, is the game needs more full explanations, more conversational language.
Like a rhetorically posed phrasing to converse with you as the audience, in a sense.
Yeah.
Because just digesting the bullet points is a little hard to do, and you will find yourself having to re-reference things because the game doesn't explicitly, like in a more conversational or kind of prose style writing, it will sometimes explain relationships between concepts, rules, or mechanics. That's kind of absent here, in that you'll just get the points. And if you want to understand sort of some like relationship between these points, you will have to grok that and put that together, because the rule's not going to suggest that in its own writing. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. I think after enough time and using it, the person reading and playing the game will eventually assemble a model in their own mind.
Yes.
But it might turn some people off immediately if they then have to just do that themselves, or it'll leave only the most dedicated people to then figure that out. It's almost a courtesy to the person that you're writing for, which is to say you're not writing for yourself when you want to put something out there.
Yeah.
You want to write it to make it as easy and accessible, not necessarily dumbing it down in any way, but you're right. Like the way that you're writing to demonstrate the relationship between rules by giving a this, therefore that kind of explanation.
Yeah.
Which can really only be done if you write it out in full sentences and paragraphs. It's like you're giving a fuller explanation and also making it more appealing as far as wanting to go through with that process.
It's like a meeting, right? It's a meeting of the minds where you have to be able to meet your reader with the information in such a way as that when they reach out to meet you, they can grasp it, right? It's like the handshake between the two of you.
Yeah.
And language is what facilitates that. And by being like more precise with your language to the point that it is just the precision of bullet points, you do lose some of that ability to meet gracefully, right? And I don't want to say that I didn't enjoy it, because I actually think the exchange of the rules themselves is really swift. Once you know what you're referencing, you're into it. And when you want to consider it for what I think it's intended to do, is like an OSR fantasy skirmish, like tactical battle game, I think it really gets in there and does that. It's just, you will have to provide the internal narrative context to the rules as you read them. And I don't mean narrative like story, but like the through line.
Yeah. But as I said, like it's interesting that we were given this in the form that it was, because it gave me a chance to think about the format of things. Like this is such an odd thing that like really only comes from you reading other books. And it's very like if you read like a book written by Gary Gygax, for example, like OD&D.
Yes.
He uses fully explained sentences, and it's still hard to understand what he's talking about.
Yep.
It's almost arcane. When you're writing instructions, there's a fine balance, and rules are in a sense a form of instruction. There's a fine balance between over-explaining something and also maintaining sort of like the point of the thing.
Yes.
And the nice thing about having a fully written out form of that is that you can tailor that. But again, even people who do this sometimes do it badly, because they carry in a lot of assumptions about what the game is about. And in all fairness, OD&D was essentially written for people who already knew, like they were all part of a group anyway.
Yeah, that's so true.
And then the fact that it got further out of that and it intrigued other people, and other people then had to make up their own rules because they didn't fully understand the ones that were being explained.
Yeah, 100%.
The only one that I have like an absolute like hard critique on are the oversized missile weapons.
That's a hard page to parse because of the density of the numbers and brackets and things.
Parsing it apart, I feel as though a grid or a table would be maybe a better way to do this. It's a little hard because I think Christopher's doing the best that he can with this, but I do feel there's probably a more elegant way to demonstrate that information, because there's a lot of numbers on a lot of very tightly packed, small fonted lines. And yes, I can find the thing that I'm looking for, but I feel as though I'm going cross-eyed while I do it. So that is my only that probably really needs a look at. But otherwise, yeah, it's more of just the suggestion about the presentation of that. But I think we can get past that now. And I'd really like to actually get into what it was like to play the game, which was actually fairly rewarding and interesting experience.
So here's a few things to consider off the top. It is, in the spirit of our episode, somewhat inspiring us. It is do it yourself. You will assemble your army, your warband, whatever you want to call it, to a currency value called worth. That's going to be based on whether you're a medium bipedal magic missile, right? And I don't mean magic missile, I mean magic ampersand missile, right? Like you have both of those things.
The magic can be a missile, in fact.
Indeed. And that would be the different components that you're building your list out of. So you're making these little squad type compositions of 4 to 8, probably, somewhere in that range of figures. Typically, like we mentioned, 28 mil, but heck, you can go crazy. And then you're going to assign these profiles based on those well-formatted grid entries, starting at in the later 50s of the book and continuing you through for nearly about 100 pages. So you get a lot of profiles. And then what you do is you take this, you make goblin swarms or dragons or sorcerer lords if you're crazy, and you then will go through a very interesting turn sequence. Now, the turn sequence itself has things you're familiar with, like movement, missile, magic, melee, right? But it's the marshalling phase that really throws you as the player into like into a mindset where you have to work with what you get, not in a bad way, but in a way where you're drawing initiative tiles, and you'll first point to a character or unit and then draw a tile. That tile will be numbered and be assigned to that character, and that defines their initiative order for the turn. The tiles themselves, you get as many tiles as there are units times 2. So if you have, say it's a 5v5 fight, right? I have 5 squads versus your 5 squads. As we did it, it was City Guard versus Barbarians.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be 10 overall units for 20 tokens or 20 tiles in the marshalling opaque container or bag, right? So then you're drawing. So there's a lot of little tokeniness right here at this start phase. It's not bad because once you've done that, that's fixed for the remainder of your turn sequence. You've assigned initiative. It's not going to, there are powers that can modify this, by the way, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
But effectively, you go through this sort of more bitsy element, but it creates a textured turn order where it's not like, oh, I'm going to go do my stuff and you do your stuff, or I'll do 3 guys, you do 3 guys. It's like, you don't really know what you're going to get. You don't know that your cavalry, who could technically move faster in inches based on their profile, might be getting a bad initiative draw, like kind of no matter what you do. And now they're vulnerable to the skirmishers that you didn't anticipate them being vulnerable to. So there are 2 ways to look at that. One, I don't want little tiles to tell me how good my dudes are for a turn. I want my guys that are good to be good. So I can understand that. But I think what it does do is it applies this invisible texture of event to the battle, right? Like, why did the knights win? Well, because they had fate, they had initiative at their back, and the player knew when to make the move with that heat, right? It's like if you try and make your charge while you're drawing all these tiles at initiative 11 and 12, and your opponent's all on 3s and 4s and 6, and you collide when you finally make your move, when you reach the melee phase, you're in trouble because you're still working on that initiative sequence. So there is a certain logic there that I do think encourages a clever interaction with the flow of opportunity.
No, I definitely saw that there was intent behind that, and it did create a lot of texture and rhythm in the battle that we were playing.
Yeah.
I don't fully understand why there needs to be twice as many tiles if they only get assigned, if there's no comparable value between tiles. But I didn't have a problem with the system overall. As with exactly as many or twice as many or whatever, you still got the relative result. It might be fun to play with the idea that there's a relationship between the values, and that would make the justification of having so many more tiles than units something more interesting.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the other concerns that I have is that the bigger the game you play, you begin to get a lot more tiles involved, even though you don't have to draw all of them.
It's true. It's like if you were to play a 10v10 game, you're 40 tiles. That's a lot. That's meaningful. So it does put a certain ceiling on the number of active units. And then when you consider the number of opposed 1-to-1 dice rolls between combatants, whether missile or melee, it certainly is suggestive of like a sweet spot. And I kind of feel like I love 6 activations. 6 activations of 4 is pretty cool, right? Like 4-man, 4-person, 4 beast creature things running about. You get to move about 6 of them per turn. You never know exactly when you're going to get to pop them because it's this martial phase that shakes you out in a different direction. But then you still have a fixed turn order. And this made us think, like all the way back to like Warhammer Fantasy. Like we're talking like first edition stuff, right? That's what it made me immediately feel.
There were some vibes for sure.
Because you go movement, missile, magic, melee, morale. It's got a rhythm, a flow, and it felt familiar, but not in a way.
And an alliteration as well.
Oh, there's a lot of cool alliteration. I got to give Christopher a shout out for that. But the way that you see the initiative sequence and then proceed through the phases with that is also pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Morale is interesting in that it is something that can happen in any phase if the condition is met. So if someone hits you with a morale attack, if you hit with the equivalent of the fear spell, if you suffer casualties in excess of 1/3 or 2/3, that's something to think about too. Maybe like in a game that's a do-it-yourself game, but then it has concepts like loss of units based on thirds. Does that mean that you should think of your squad sizes with that in mind? Or you're always dealing in like halves and stuff?
Mm.
Like, should you just make every squad 6 if it's at the 2/3 mark? You know what I mean? Like, there are sometimes mechanics implying suggestions to you as the do-it-yourself gamer that come up. And I don't quite know if that's necessary, really, but it's just something to think about. But morale is interesting in that any phase can bring about those conditions, whether it is in the missile, the magic, or the melee. And then when you reach the morale phase, that's effectively when you're making your check to come back. And you can still suffer negative results if you fail, but this is an opportunity to effectively rally, trying to recover your performance. And when we played our game, we had city guard versus barbarians, right? So it was sort of like fantasy barbarian types with furs and broadswords versus like a low medieval kind of city guard, like a pretty strange matchup, so to speak, but pretty cool thematic looking characters, very like north of the wall, if you want to get all George R.R. Martin about it. And what immediately kind of stuck was that the stuff kind of behaved in a way that it looked like when the guys had the two-handed swords and they made the charge. Well, there's an advantage to that in the modifier that you roll for melee.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of behaved with a little bit of what I anticipated. And this is us making we played what you see is what you get. So the city guard had crossbows, so they had crossbows. That's how we played it. Like, we didn't really do worth. We didn't get in super complicated with army building because for us, the priority was getting into the mechanics and seeing how it played. But like getting the chance to see these little things sort of behave in the way you wanted them to. Not overwhelmingly like, I want to win, be an awesome winner for me.
Yeah.
But more like, oh yeah, when these barbarians get the charge, they were more deadly than when the city guard kind of got to move in on them in their close order positioning, right? And that's another kind of cool thing, like having this open to close order skirmish. It's not quite just like, to be critical of other titles in a broad sense. There's a lot of melee games or melee emphasized fantasy or otherwise games where it boils down to, I've crashed into you. Let me roll all this.
Right.
But there's a certain amount of formation play here that kind of erodes that. Like if you just want to run at somebody and their formation's smarter than yours and they have a better marshalling tile than you, you're not going to have a good time. And that makes it a more interesting fight. It does mean that there are times where chance can go against you with these marshalling tiles, right? Like we saw in our game, the barbarians needed anything better than a 3 and they just did not get it. And it was like, well, you're going to lose a unit now just because that's sort of, you don't have the ability to respond. But the truth is you probably shouldn't have left those guys hanging, right? To have such a fate if you were not to get such an optimal draw. So it's just that exchange of like, how do you ride the roller coaster of chance? And this game introduces that in what I think is a novel way.
The game also focuses on, so its dice mechanics mainly focus around opposed D20 rolls. We may have mentioned that, but.
And how do you feel about the use of the D20 in a skirmish game like this?
I think it's great, and it's certainly not a completely foreign concept.
Yep. There's the Frostgraves and Stargraves of the world that do it, but I think it's cool.
Yeah. There's a nice sort of granularity for that scale of game where I think it makes for a good fit. The only concern I have is that sometimes it felt a bit swingy because you have two values that are trying to beat each other, and they could beat each other at plus modifiers at extreme distances from each other.
Yes.
So it wasn't like rolling over a set value where one number is static and the other number is rolled and values are added to see if it beats. It was two dynamic systems rolling with modifiers. And the modifiers would obviously help improve the odds, But there were certain times where it felt like, well, I mean, to be fair, we rolled like a whole bunch of killer rolls for the barbarians at one point.
We really did.
But I think that there's something to be considered in the idea that you're using two sets of granular randomization pitted against each other, creating either very tight resolutions or massive gaps. And that's not necessarily a problem. There's lots of games that operate with swingy results.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, some games really own it, like Dungeon Crawl Classics.
Yeah.
That's a role-playing game, but it really embraces that idea. So there's not necessarily a problem with that. It was just about tuning my brain to being like, oh, okay, that's just how this game feels. And then I got into it. And one of the things that I really liked about this game was once we got the turn order, it really got down to a clip. Like we were rolling through a lot faster than I have with like other games. I remember like the first time that I was playing, what's it called? The World War II game.
Was it the bolt action?
It was the bolt action. You're right. That's the one. It took me a while. It's funny because they do a good job in that system of making it feel really efficient and like being able to mark things and there's this sense of progress, but it felt kind of tedious. The thing about Fights of Fantasy is that once we actually figured out what that flow was, even though it had some things that we weren't familiar with, it actually we went through it pretty fast.
We had established like a good we know who has missiles. We know who's going to go in this phase, so we can just hop to them. Like the first 2 turns took a lot longer than the last 4 turns, which we ate up.
Yeah.
Because once you're comfortable with doing the marshalling phase, and like, again, there's not a ton of decision pointing in the marshal phase. It's more reacting to the draw of tiles you get. But once you've done that and you know how to sort the tiles and do that phase, after that, it's kind of just like, it feels a bit like a card draw game, like some of the card-driven miniature games, because your turn sequence is just defined in order. Just this, that, and you work your way through it for each of the phases. And because it's dynamic and changing on a turn-by-turn basis, you don't get like locked in or trapped, but it does mean you have to be comfortable with making choices with suboptimal conditions around you. And I think that's the reason why a game can be good, is it creates these narrative conditions, right? Where you're like, well, technically I might have to go second, even if I charge.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe my archers who are unloaded are the best guys to actually make this melee charge. Maybe I'll lose more than I want to, but they could be the right dudes just because of the order of this. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's that irregularity in a certain sense.
Yeah, and there's more than one kind of war game.
Yeah, very true.
I feel the problem with the popular conception, or at least the way that larger companies sometimes put this across, is that they very much push into the competitive market and the tournament play.
Yep.
And this might give people the perception that you can't have those sort of asymmetries.
Yes.
Or those complex interactions, or things like swingy mechanics, because it really depends on what you're making the game to do. For something like narrative play, it might feel more realistic, or it might create more interesting dots to connect when you're actually playing it, because what you're trying to do is, in a sense, decipher the battlefield to tell you a story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate when games kind of feel that idea. I don't get the sense that this game is intended to be competitive so much as it's just intended to be entertaining.
I get that sense as well.
And a lot of it has to do with the level of specificity in all of these environments would be maximally challenging to balance such a thing that has rules for aquatic and air combat that uses complex mathematics, which might be overkill. I'll leave that to the designer to decide, but I certainly see in that the intent was to be thorough.
Yeah.
And not so much about making sure that it was always balanced. It was more to create interesting outcomes by having those options available.
I'm reminded of a Dungeon Crawl Classics campaign that you ran for us and some friends, where we had like a village and we went north to go confront a keep of chaotic chaossery.
Oh, yes.
And the prologue to this that we did not see was the bad guys, the chaossery, came down and they fought the village and like messed it up. And it's like, oh, that would have been an excellent Fights of Fantasy game.
Yes.
And that's kind of like where I could see this game really working is like in a campaign context when playing with more dudes or models or whatever than comfortably fit on your grid or fit the theater of the mind. I would say hopping to this would work really well, would translate cleanly to a lot of those like same assumed characters that we think of in like our classic old school fantasy. Like these are your archetypes defined by your 90 pages or so, right?
Well, and added to that, the flexibility of it.
Yeah.
Right? The fact that it is effectively a toolbox. I mean, within a thematic, technically you could probably reverse engineer and make a sci-fi game out if you wanted, but probably not. But the fact that it is a perfectly designed WYSIWYG experience, right? Like I can grab a handful of models, fantasy models, out of one of my bins, and I can look at that guy and then look at the table here and the different classifications and almost decipher or work out what that unit is, and then I can just plunk it on the table. At least that part of the rule book is really easy to use.
And we talked about wanting to maybe print off those pages or make quick reference cards using that information.
Mm-hmm.
And if you, for example, had, like your warband of barbarians, you might make a page or two that you can quickly reference for that warband. And then you would easily have their stats. You'd have it all in front of you. It could even be assembled to a certain fixed value in worth if you wanted to do that. It just suggests to me a certain narrative first emphasis, especially in the way that I would do like a quote order of battle, that I would do worth to make sure someone isn't like double or triple value someone else, but I wouldn't sweat it. It's just for me like kind of a cool thing to keep in mind and help me define my lists. But I wouldn't let it be a trap where I'm thinking like, well, I'm at 113 worth here. What am I going to do with these guys who are at 103? I need 10 worth. It's like, no, you don't. It's fine. If the lists are good and it's fulfilling the narrative purpose, you don't need to add a half troll now just because I need to figure out the points. Like, no, it's cool. Focus on the story. Use the toolbox to do that. And I think it's a good toolbox for that. Some of the things I think that you really still have to keep in mind is like there are granular details to track. Like morale has 4 steps. So there's stuff you're tracking. Like it's not, even though we said it's quite light and easy and there's fast play, there's still degrees of degradation that you have to track. You are rolling opposed rolls for individual combatants. So when my group of 6 hits your group of 6, you know what I'm saying? We're rolling for that. So usually you might not be a line of 6 abreast. You might be in a close order formation of 3 by 2, your 6 guys clustered up to get morale bonuses and combat advantages. But you're still going to roll opposed D20s off for the 3 guys facing the 3 other guys in that little battle. So there's that granularity that you have to have a certain degree of desire for or comfort with. If you're looking to just hit 2 squads together and I roll 12 dice and you roll 14 dice, it's like it's not that. And I don't think that is, not that that's bad, but I don't think that's really what this wants to even try to be. It's like those cool duels that go the way you don't expect. Like we had a crossbowman stay alive for way too long.
Yeah.
Not to criticize the game by any means by saying that. It's just, that was a lucky son of a gun.
It just worked out like that. And it was fun that it worked out that way. I will say, yeah, it's probably not for everybody. because of the level of detail and some of the value tracking that is involved. But I tend to like those sorts of games. I don't know exactly what our audience is into. I'm sure we talk about everything. So I'm sure there's some people out here that'll get what this game is doing.
Yeah, for sure. This is a question I want to throw at you about this game.
Mm.
If you were, say, going to take 20 fantasy models and make an army for this game, what do you think would be a fun army to do? Like, not thinking about worth per se, but like, what would be a fun way to play this game?
If I were to play it like we were playing it pretty as flat and vanilla as we could. And I'd like to play more of it because there's certain things about it we haven't really dug into. Like the magic system seems really intriguing to me.
It's quite modular as well, too.
Yeah, and yeah, it's very like component based, and there is a challenge in that as well. It's the same one. The more complexity you add, the more figuring out it takes. But I think I'd like to see what larger scale of battles are and more mixtures of units. So like have your standard like army guys, but then maybe have some like Minotaur guys and maybe some ogres, right? And I would like to feel out more of what like larger units feel in comparison to smaller. Or you could do the same thing if you had like, goblins, like smaller enemies.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to see how this game handles scale. We might have, depending on how our conversation continues with them, but I'd be interested to keep trying this out and are able to show that off in some way. That might be cool too.
Well, check this out. Like a lot of games don't really engage with or a lot of war games, I should say, because RPGs commonly have this, but a lot of war games stop short at having a different scale of mass other than like orc human. You know what I mean? It's like maybe you can be a Skaven if you're hunched over, but like you're basically this humanoid form or you're a series of exceptions. And this game doesn't really make you a bunch of exceptions. It just makes you a different fundamental stat block. But you're not break this rule, break that rule, and forget about that rule. You know what I mean? To then be a monster class, as it were.
Well, it's funny because there's so many games that I can think, like miniature games I can think of where like size scale would seem to mean something, but for some reason gets hand waved.
Yeah, 100%.
The funniest one to me is the break between Warhammer 40K's lore of how big Space Marines are on the battlefield in comparison to how they represent. Is like, yeah, you take like an Imperial Guardsman and you put him next to an Astartes, and you're like, oh, well, they look about the same. I mean, this guy's got chunkier armor. But then you look at how that's supposed to look, and it's like, yeah, that dude's like 7 some feet tall, like almost 8 feet tall, and that guy's a regular guy. Maybe shorter, actually.
Yeah, maybe a little malnourished.
Depending on what planet he's from, he might be kind of a little guy. Like, not by a ton, but like in average human height. And it's like, what does that mean on the table? Not much.
It's true.
Right. So you're right. I don't really, even in games that have like large units, they either turn into highly resistant characters. If the game does have multiple hits, then they turn into something like a hit point bag.
Yeah. That's the abstraction to make them work. It's just like, oh, you're just a hard to kill. That's what you are. You're a hard to kill.
Yeah. The fact that this game, I appreciate that this game has a wider range of what that actually means. Like it adjusts a lot of the stats. And then, of course, you could tweak those depending on what you were actually working with. Like I might have a troll model that isn't as bulky as my ogre model. They're both big, but I could tweak it so that like this guy feels a little leaner, maybe a little less resistant, but he maybe he hits harder or he's faster.
So if I was to give you an army, I would give you some Minotaurs and some like Beastmen guys. I'd give you a Beastmen army, Minotaurs and Beastmen, and then you could have different scope of dudes in the same warband to play with the sizes. Because actually, why I would give you Beastmen too is I'm thinking Wood Elves, because I like the fact that you can be skirmish order or close order and you're not stuck. It's how you move your guys. So, and there are different like conditions that you will meet when you are standing apart or standing together. And I just like that. And a lot of fantasy forces don't really do that. they tend to be like, we have to be shoulder to shoulder to survive. But wood elves can skirmish. Wood elves can fall back into a spear line. Wood elves can run between the trees together. Like, I could just see them being fun to play. So I don't know. I tend to think of, like, when I'm engaging with a rule set, like, almost secretly, what did the designer think of as the optimal armies for this? To go off the beaten track a bit, there is my beloved Chain of Command, a World War II game. The first edition of that, we'll talk about the second edition coming up, but that first edition does indeed have the preference towards the German and the British armies. Like, it's baked into the rule set that you're kind of supposed to be using them. Anyone other than that are sort of exceptions or deviations from the core experience of the rule set.
They're less considered in that sense.
Yeah.
I remember even in the campaign character generation that the American and Russian occupations seem almost joke-like.
Hamburger flipper and turnip eater, I think, were the...
turnip farmer.
It was pretty bad. It was pretty bad.
It was like, wow. But then again, it's all in who you're writing your audience, who you're writing for. If you think that I'm just making this for a bunch of people in my neck of the woods, then people will find the joke funny. And maybe people outside of that will find it funny as well, but it's not going to feel quite as satisfying when they want to play it.
Yeah, I get you.
But then it's a tabletop game. You can make up your own thing.
Yeah, it's true. You're in charge. But I really want to say, like, what I would do with this game is I would use it as a campaign toolbox to play with fantasy old school role playing. I see it as an optimal companion to things like OSC, like Old School Essentials, or Dungeon Crawl Classics, or even original D&D, OD&D if you like.
This would work well with like Osric or any of those other sorts of simpler Black Hack and stuff like that.
Because that D20 logic is there, where you're just modifying it within a certain range band of variables and values, I should say. And it's got such a sandbox feel. Like, I mean, you have to do a lot of work to make everything out of these charts and assemble your lists and decide, like, I am doing wood elves. I'm not picking wood elves. I'm doing medium bipeds, which are wood elves, because I'm going to make them that, and it's going to be awesome. But I have to decide that, and I have to bring that designer hat with me. But with the interest in doing so, you're given a lot of great tools to do that.
And yeah, there's a lot of these sort of like old schoolisms in here. Like there's rules for what is it, like henchmen and stuff like that. And these are like terms that come out of the sort of classic fantasy rule systems. I'd like to try more of it because I don't feel like I've fully gotten to the bottom of it. But like, this is our just sort of cursory, like, obviously we have a deadline, so I felt like we had to say something at some point. And I'd like to keep digging.
There's 169 pages, so at a certain point you have to decide where the bite ends, right? And it was a big bite.
And it was a bit of a dry read as well.
But that's what we were prepared to take on for the purpose of exploring a game that's one, like, kind of representative of like what an indie designer can do. Like, you can be the person who makes a game, I
totally appreciate that. I also see that his family is involved in the contributions to this. We've got a lot of other Reichenbachs involved.
That's cool. That's awesome.
I don't know if they're brothers or cousins or maybe both, but it's a family game from the creative point of view.
And what's neat, I think, about this game is that if you want to feel like the designer hat, the authorial penmanship, if you want any of that, you will be able to craft something of interest here.
Yeah, it's a very authentic game. It's very well considered. There's a lot of heart in it, though, you have to be patient and take your time to get through it.
Yeah.
But no, it was an enjoyable experience, and that's why we brought it to our audience. Yeah, and so just to go over this again, we really want to do more of this. I suppose we've only managed to credential ourselves by showing that we read a lot of role-playing books, but we do have experiences. I am a game designer. Troy has done game design as well.
Yeah.
And so much as it's our opinion, like, there's not necessarily the only way we think to do things or the right way to do things. That's not it at all. But if you're interested in hearing what we think, we'd really like to make this more of a regular thing. As I said, it doesn't have to be a whole game. I would love to see people send in their modules, their adventures, their game aids, and things like that. The tricky part about that is that we might have to wait till we can accumulate a few of them together before we can go through them all. But we'll make sure to note people by name. And as I said, if it's really like, it has to be basically unplayable, but we'll keep that between the designer who made it and us, and we'll just say, hey, here's a few things that we think that you could improve on. We don't think it's quite show ready yet, but if you make it to a point where we can play it and we feel like it's got legs, then absolutely. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And we hope that you appreciate the criticisms. We try to keep it as fair as possible, and it's only within our own knowledge set. So like, it may appeal to somebody who isn't us.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that if we don't fully get every aspect of it, that means that it's wrong.
Totally. And I mean, you may be able to tell this game kind of appeals to my sensibilities in a few different ways, but it's also something I want to say is like, the only way something happens is if you reach out and make it happen. Nothing happens through inactivity. So if you have a project and you want to get it, you want to push it along, this could be another point of motivation. So give us a consideration. You can reach out to the email contact we put down below. And what we'll do is we'll just start a conversation. We don't record like all the time. So sometimes, there may be like, we'll talk, and then there may be time before it shows up, in terms of a recording, but it is something that we want to ensure we do because community matters. Making games is a blast, and games as a form of art and expression, I think is super cool and important.
Yeah. And I firmly believe in the grassroots traditions of this hobby.
Yeah.
That any of those great games that you've played, if you go back to where they came from, they just start with people making stuff up and trying things and taking games that they like, but then doing a twist or this or that. And so that's how you end up with something great, is you have to start by putting it down and showing it there, showing it off to somebody and let someone work through it and try to figure it out. Oh, and one other point is we make a point to play the things.
Yeah.
So in our rules as written, we may or may not have played it, and we're mostly going through the thing as almost like a book report. And we're open on that analysis of how we do the raw episodes. But when it comes to the DIY episodes, we have to play it.
Yeah, got it.
We have to at least get to the point where we can I mean, how else would we be able to say, I think it needs a bit more work, or this is fantastic, but maybe you could fix this or whatever. But we're going to play it for sure.
I also want to just invite the community to challenge yourself, to put forward your own idea, come up with something cool. Like Max said, this hobby all comes from just people having ideas. There's it's not coding. There is math, sure, at times, but there's the barrier to entry to making something in the tabletop space is so different than what we think of for gaming, right? We think of, I need all these parts, I need all these components, I need all these computers, I need all these teams and staff. It's like, when you're making a tabletop RPG or a war game, it can be as much as you and a Google Doc, and you can just express something that's unique. It doesn't have to be like earth shattering, it could just be like a cool new way to use Warhammer models you already have. But like, that's cool in its own right and completely valid. And that's stuff that I do. So
yeah. Or, maybe you've got that really sweet D&D adventure that you've been working on and you think it's got something in it that you think is really interesting. We'll give it a try. We'll give it a shot.
Oh, that would be really great. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, we reach out to the people who send this, and we're not going to take your ideas. You own them. You can prove them if you write them down. Keep your receipts, and yeah, we just want to talk about it. So I think that'll do it for this episode, and I hope people like this. I hope that we can do more of them.
I absolutely agree. I've had a blast. I really want to reach out and say thank you to Christopher for considering us and sending fights of fantasy over. Ultimately, I really want to express that this was a super enjoyable game. It's a very cool flavor, and if it's what you're looking for, it's going to deliver.
And check it out on Wargame Vault. You can definitely find it there. So until then, I guess it's that's it, and happy gaming. Happy gaming, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed delving into today's episode. A big thanks to all of you out there for joining us. If you want to continue the conversation, you can find us on Instagram and YouTube at Tales and Tactics Podcast, or on all popular podcast platforms. Join us again on the next exciting episode of Tales and Tactics.